computer. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is Rob Bell, your host, and you are watching Getting the Record Straight. This is our Truth to Power segment where we talk with activists and scholars and thought leaders, if you will, who are doing things in the black community locally as well as nationally. And in this case, we're really blessed because this is someone who's been on a global scene. And I'm really happy to have him. I'm going to introduce him first. But before I do, please be advised that you can see Getting the Record Straight if you go to the website blackrocksoul.com. That's blackrocksoul.com. And of course, you click GRS and you get to our videos, Getting the Record Straight videos. And then if you click on BRS radio, you can listen to 24 hours of the best music in the world, Black Rock and Soul review. So be mindful of that and get to it. Speaking of getting to it, we're going to get to this interview in a second. With me and my guest is Dr. David Muhammad. And in my humble opinion, he is definitely one of the most important and significant leaders in the global African community. He is the Caribbean representative of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan, Minister Louis Farrakhan, and the Nation of Islam. He is also the director of the Black Agenda Project. Brother Muhammad has a PhD in sociology. He's a lecturer, radio host, and producer, a teacher. He's followed by over 15,000 people on Facebook and on other platforms. He's sold thousands of tapes of his speeches and lectures. And I am really, really honored to introduce him. So, welcome, Dr. David Muhammad. Thank you so much for being with me and with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, my beloved brother. And it's an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to share some thoughts.
Thank you so much. I can't remember exactly how I became aware of you. I don't know whether it was whether I watched you on YouTube, one of your lectures on YouTube, or which is where I go typically to see a lot of your discussions, or whether it was on Facebook or a website. But at any rate, I was just floored, and I've just been so enlightened by the information that you've been, able to share with people, and particularly the history of Trinidad, Tobago, that Afro Caribbean history of resistance, of liberation, of struggle, and it really is inspirational for me personally, and I believe certainly black folks here in the States really should be should learn more about it and be more exposed to what has happened and the struggles that have been undertaken by brothers and sisters in the Caribbean. And of course, we know, or should know anyway, about Kwame Ture, who's from Trinidad Tobago, and CLR James. But if you could just, give us a kind of brief lecture of the history of Trinidad Tobago, and some of the key and most relevant figures in terms of African resistance in the Trinidad Tobago and the Caribbean. I think that would
Yes,
be a
sir.
great point of departure.
Yes.
A long one, but nonetheless a great one.
Well, first of all, our philosophy is that we, in order to successfully achieve many of our collective objectives, including that of reparations and our upliftment as a people in the struggle, that it's important that we see ourselves as one African diaspora. I know there are those who believe in fragmenting, segmenting, and dividing the African diaspora into Black Americans, Asians, Black Latinos, Black Caribbeans, and Black Europeans. But I believe that makes us very weak, especially on the backdrop of the struggle that we continue to face. So the Caribbean region has become somewhat largely integrated into the Black community of America as far as the contribution of the people is concerned. But the Caribbean identity has largely been obscured. So, for example, the largest Black organization in America was led by and started by a Black man from Jamaica in the Caribbean, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who led 6 million followers in the early 1920s in the United States. And Marcus Garvey, seen by many as a father of Pan-Africanism, came up out of the Caribbean. He was born in St. Anne's in Jamaica. The three fathers of Pan-Africanism, as we know it, were born in Trinidad: Henry Sylvester Williams, C.L.R. James, and George Padmore. As a matter of fact, it was a Trinidadian, Henry Sylvester Williams, who held the world's first Pan-Africanist Congress in the world, which was in the year 1900 in London, England, where there were delegates from 30 different countries. This is before we had computers or the internet, television, and before most of us even had phones.
Right.
Also, the man who popularized the phrase Black Power in America was a Trinidadian, then known as Stokely Carmichael, now known as Kwame Ture. Probably the most identifiable or visible Black leader that America has had in the 1960s, Malcolm X. His mother was born in Grenada, which is a tiny Caribbean island right next to Trinidad and Barbados. The preeminent leader of the Black struggle today, and the last, I would say, living legend who has organizations of Black people in every single part of the world, the last that we have left in that capacity, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, also came from Caribbean parents. His father was born in Jamaica. His mother was born on the tiny island of St. Kitts. Mm-hmm. And even some of our greatest scholars, the world got to know Marcus Garvey through the writings of Professor Tony Martin, who wrote Race First, Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Mosiah Garvey, the Pan-Africanist Connection, and also the Jewish Onslaught. Dr. Tony Martin was Trinidadian. J.A. Rogers, who wrote Sex and Race, was Jamaican. That beautiful Caribbean nation of Guyana gave us the man who exposed the entire fallacy within the educational curriculum regarding the history of Christopher Columbus. I'm talking about Professor Ivan Van Sertima. Yes. He was born in Guyana. He wrote Blacks in Science and African Presence Before Columbus, or They Came Before Columbus. And in all honesty, this is just a teardrop in the ocean of great Black leaders, scholars, teachers, and historians who came out of the Caribbean and influenced Black America. I mean, we go in the direction of hip hop and music in general. Then we also bring in names such as KRS-One, Tribe Called Quest, even today your Rihanna's and Nicki Minaj's, but going back to arguably the man who started hip hop, DJ Kool Herc, born in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so many. I mean, this is really just a quick scan.
Yeah.
And also as well, the Caribbean, in particular Jamaica, has punched way above its weight on terms of sports, entertainment, and culture. the amount of gold medals in 100-meter dashes and the amount of Olympic records that have been broken by Jamaicans, pound for pound, makes them the most effective and best prepared nation on earth per capita in the Olympics. And also in the sport of cricket, which has a different kind of symbolism altogether in the Caribbean region, because it is the slave master sport, cricket, where Black men have risen to excellence and beaten the slave masters in their own game. So the contribution of the Caribbean, though, having said all of this, has largely been obscured into the identity of, say, Black American. But it is a heritage and a history that we're very proud of. It's a connection that we're honored to make. And we believe very strongly in building those bridges between the different parts of the African diaspora, because of course it was Black people from the Caribbean and the continent of Africa, in particular West Africa, that built the Black community in Europe, in particular London, England, where you have also had so many greats who have emerged out of that whole scenario, so much leadership, and even in America as well. Again, this is very disjointed what I'm saying, but of course we all celebrate the success of Oprah Winfrey, but it was a Black woman from Trinidad by the name of Hazel Scott, who was born in Trinidad, went to America. She was a jazz pianist who played classical, or a classical pianist who played jazz.
Genius.
And she emerged to be somewhat of a prodigy as a musician. Also became an actress. I mean, we're talking about the days of Gone with the Wind and Hattie McDaniels being the first Black woman to win the Oscar and so on. And Hazel Scott, we're talking about the 1940s, Black woman from Trinidad who refused to take the role of a maid or a lowly housewife under that imagery of being dominated by male hegemony. And as a matter of fact, she was dismissed from, she wasn't dismissed at that point, but there was a particular incident where she had to play the role of a wife. It was 5 Black women who were wives of 5 Black soldiers who were coming back from the war. And she had to point out to the producers, any Black woman, no matter how poor, who's welcoming her husband back from the war after however many months or years, would not be dressed in rags the way that they were dressing them up in rags to receive their husbands. But I say this about Hazel Scott because she was the first Black woman in America to have her own television show. It was the Hazel Scott Show. And that was 30 years before the Oprah Winfrey Show, debuted in America in the 1950s. It was tremendously successful. But like so many of our people, Hazel Scott was accused of being communist. There was a hearing against it. She actually married Adam Clayton Powell.
Right, okay.
A politician who actually was the first person in a speech to use the term Black Power to our recollection. So we say Kwame Ture popularized the phrase Black Power, but Adam Clayton Powell, it was just about 1 month before Adam Clayton Powell. In fact, I don't even think it was a whole month before. If I remember correctly, it was May 29th that Adam Clayton Powell in 1966 gave a speech saying, making reference to Black Power. But then it was on June the 16th in Mississippi, 1966, that Kwame Ture, then Stokely Carmichael, said, we are going to start calling for Black Power. And he made the crowds say the phrase. It was his greeting, it was his farewell, it was his mantra. And so of course but even prior to that, there was a novelist by the name of Richard Wright, who wrote a book entitled Black Power. It's a fiction novel in 1954. Just not just for the sake of clarity. But yeah, so the Caribbean has given all of these gifts to the African diaspora, and the struggle continues.
Well, in that same vein, I believe from what I've heard from you, and then done a little bit of research myself, that they've also, and particularly Trinidad, had an impact and made tremendous gains in the political front. That
Yes.
by working, by developing political movements, and that I think we, again, here in the States could learn from. And I was just fascinated when you discussed, because I didn't really know much about Eric Williams.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your first prime minister, wasn't it? Black prime minister?
Yes, sir. He was the first prime minister of Trinidad
Oh,
and
okay.
Tobago, and he was one of the four pillars of CARICOM. Now,
Mm-hmm.
CARICOM to us is the template of a United States of the Caribbean. And on the visits of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan into the Caribbean, of which I would have accompanied him in about 7 or 8 different Caribbean countries, he has always called for the unification of a federated Caribbean region. So Dr. Eric Williams, being our first prime minister, he was one of the four founding fathers of CARICOM, because at the time when CARICOM came together, Caribbean Community, in 1973, there were only 4 independent nations at the time in the Caribbean. So it was Dr. Eric Williams, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Michael Manley, Prime Minister of Jamaica, Errol Barrow, Prime Minister of Barbados, and Forbes Burnham, who was President of Guyana. So those 4, and then Grenada became independent in 1973. They were next.
Wow.
Interestingly, though, just point of interest, Grenada won the Miss World competition in 1970 in England, and it was a very controversial. The future prime minister of Grenada was actually one of the judges. But they made a film about this the other day with Keira Knightley. But it's an interesting bit of history because they became very race sensitive because there were massive protests in England over the competition because of apartheid in South Africa. So because of those protests, they brought in a Black judge who ended up being Eric Gary of Grenada, who became prime minister later on, 3 years later. And South Africa actually had 2 representatives. They had Miss South Africa, who was a white woman, and they had Miss Africa South, who was a Black woman. And Grenada came first. The favorite among the white people was Miss Sweden. So Miss Sweden either came second or Miss Africa South. I think Miss Africa South, the Black woman from South Africa, came second or third. And it was a very, very interesting story. But anyway, the different Caribbean nations started to get independence one by one. But the real difference with Dr. Eric Williams, though, is that in the Caribbean in the 1930s, which coincided with the 100-year anniversary of emancipation, there were many labor uprisings. So emancipation took place in the Caribbean in 1838, the English-speaking colonies. And so 100 years later, or just short of that, you had the labor uprisings in Trinidad in 1937. The oil fields were set on fire and there was mass rioting. In Barbados, they pushed vehicles off the docks into the river. In St. Vincent, they broke all the windows in the courthouses. In Jamaica, in Trelawney, and other places, you had multiple riots and uprisings. In Belize, you had a group called the Unemployed Brigade, 2,000 youth marching through the city, calling for better conditions. in Castries, St. Lucia, in St. Kitts, all over the Caribbean. And after all of those uprisings, 100 years after slavery, the British had a commission of inquiry to determine what the cause of these riots was and to see how they could prevent them. And the major solution that they came up with, and this is of critical importance, the major solution that the British came up with in what was called the Moyne Commission was a number of things. Had a number of observations, number of findings. Work hours too long, salaries too small, cost of living too high, standard of living, quality of life too low, basic things like that. But they saw the solution allowing Black people to vote, because we weren't allowed to vote. So there was partial adult suffrage in 1925, where they introduced a voting system, but for the most part, only the white people and landowners and those with a certain amount of wealth were allowed to vote. But in 1946, just about 8 years after the riots, they passed another law, full adult suffrage, giving the masses the right to vote. And what the whites did is that they took a position to pull back on terms of their leadership visibility in the society. And they developed a system where they would continue to fund and finance campaign party politics and have Black faces representing white interests. So Kwame Ture, in his book with Charles V. Hamilton entitled Black Power, chapter 1 of the book, Black Power, is entitled White Power. Chapter 2 of the book, Black Power, is entitled Black Power. Chapter 2. But chapter 1 is entitled White Power.
Right.
And Kwame Ture makes the point that you cannot have white power in a Black community unless you have Black politicians who are representing white interests. And this has been the story of the Caribbean for a long time. Of course, we've had proud moments in our political representation, but for the most part, the same Caribbean white bourgeoisie elite 1% have maintained domination and control over the economies in all of these Caribbean societies.
And what percentage are white in well, in Trinidad Tobago?
You're looking at approximately 1%.
1%?
1%.
1%, okay.
As a matter of fact, I don't think the white population in any English-speaking Caribbean country exceeds 3 or 4%.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
But these are patterns that have persisted. Mm-hmm. You know, it's something, because it's not just your traditional institutionalized racism, but you also have features such as what is called a pigmentocracy and also colorism, where there has been, even among us as Black people, there's been a skin color complexion discrimination and hierarchy where light-skinned Africans have received more privilege in a white-controlled society than dark-skinned African people. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the pattern of leadership in many Caribbean countries, there has been a white preference. Did you know, up to just the other day, the Prime Minister of St. Lucia was a white man? Mm-hmm. The first Prime Minister of Jamaica, Alexander Bustamante, he was a white man. As a matter of fact, in the early days before independence and before full adult suffrage, all of the elected officials, or the majority of them, would have been white people. And so even when we became independent, even when we had full adult suffrage, etc., there was still that influence embedded within the system, that pigmentocracy or colorism that we call it, that you still see to some degree today. to a
Can you
limited
talk about?
extent, but it's still there.
Can you jump up and talk about the significance and really who Eric Williams was?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Eric Williams, as the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, actually stands out in a very unique way in comparison to other Caribbean leadership pioneers. Reason being, most of the first prime ministers of most of the English speaking Caribbean countries were trade unionists. So Alexander Bustamante in Jamaica, I mean, decades before he was prime minister, he had the Bustamante Trade Union. E.T. Joshua in St. Vincent, he was a trade union leader. V.C. Byrd in Antigua, first prime minister, he was a trade union leader. In Guyana, the first two presidents, Chady Jagan and Forbes Burnham, not only were they trade union leaders, they were solid Marxist Leninists. Barbados, Sarah Barrow. So you'll notice as well that a lot of the political parties have the last two initials LP. You have the JLP, Jamaica Labour Party. You have the BLP, Barbados Labour Party. You have in Grenada the GULP, the Grenada United Labour Party. In St. Vincent, the ULP, United Labour Party again. So in Trinidad, you had the DLP, Democratic Labour Party, which was largely an Indian-based party. But many of the trade union leaders of these labor parties became eventually the first prime ministers of those countries when they gained independence. However, Trinidad and Tobago was different. Trinidad and Tobago's first prime minister was not a trade union leader, although we did have a trade union leader who was on the front line of leading all of those issues as they were concerns in other countries too. That was a great individual born in Grenada. His name was Uriah Buzz Butler. He would have been the first prime minister of Trinidad, but Trinidad and Tobago actually had somewhat of an education revolution because our first prime minister was not a trade unionist, he was a scholar. He was a PhD. He was the only PhD among the first prime ministers of the Caribbean. And interestingly, his PhD remains today archived as one of the most valuable books in the entire Black Studies, African Studies collection. In 1943, Dr. Eric Williams wrote Capitalism and Slavery. And he identified patterns of slavery when it was legal to capitalism today, now that slavery is no longer legal. So it's like capitalism is the new modern day slavery, the way that Black people are positioned within the economies in each of these societies. It was also a profound history book enlightening us on the understanding of the African Holocaust that our people have gone through. So Dr. Eric Williams in Capitalism and Slavery made such statements such as one, he said that it was the free slave labor of Africans that fueled and funded the genesis of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, that is what has made America and Europe rich in today's context. Not just the theft of the wealth and resources from Africa, but it was their spectacular management of what they stole that perpetuated their wealth and access to resources. And only capitalism could have done that. Only capitalism could have extended the benefits that they got from slavery. I mean, not meaning to go off on a tangent, but look at what happened this week in Jamaica. So you had the royal family, Prince William and his wife, Kate, who visited Belize, Jamaica, and the Bahamas. And I am so proud of our Black people today that long gone are the days where I remember the royal family comes to our country and we line up like natives and wave flags and blow kisses, you know. Our people came out and raised issues of reparations for African people for the crimes
That's what
against
I'm talking
humanity.
about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been listening to the radio in England and the responses of the white people to the reception to Prince William. Now, remember Prince William, he's the future king of England, and he might be the king of England much sooner than we think, because the Queen of England is 94 years old.
Yeah.
Her son, Prince Charles, who's the next monarch, I think he's over 70 years old. So we don't know how much longer he will be around. But Prince William, I think, is in his 40s. So he's likely to be the King of England for quite a while. And he went over there to the Caribbean and made statements in condemnation of slavery in a way that no member of his family has done before. However, I was told that when these members of the royal family make any statements about slavery, they are vetted by solicitors to ensure that they don't say anything self-incriminating that could be liable in accelerating the pace of African people getting reparations. And so there's one key word that they always avoid. So they will say or give statements of regret, statements of sorrow. I think Prince William said this was the ugliest moment in England's history. It was a terrible thing. It was a dreadful thing. It should have never happened, etc., etc., etc. But the one thing that they refrain from saying at all times is, we are sorry for what we have done. And actually, the 10-point plan of action, and I say proudly that in many ways, the Caribbean politically is leading the way globally in the call for reparations. Because on March the 11th, 2014, all 15 heads of CARICOM governments unanimously agreed to a 10-point plan of action to call for reparations. And none of those 10 points involve us getting cash onto some ATM machine that's going to fall out of the sky. Point number 10 is debt cancellation. But none of the other 9 points, or even the 10th point for that matter, involves us getting money. And point number 1 in the 10-point plan of action for reparations, drafted by Professor Sir Hilary Beckles of Barbados, is a full formal apology. Because without that, we are hindered from proceeding in the formalities to justify what is to come. And that is what they have been skillfully and craftily been avoiding for such a long time. But coming back to Dr. Eric Williams, in 1943, he wrote Capitalism and Slavery, and then he started doing a series of lectures. Again, think on this. All of the other Caribbean leaders were calling for workers' rights, employment benefits, higher wages and salaries. But our first prime minister was going around educating Black people. And he also had a vision to build a school system of free secondary education for all. And so when he became prime minister, he became the premier in 1956. Trinidad and Tobago became independent in 1962. And with our independence, he naturally became prime minister. And that education revolution has continued from that day. Those members of the elite hated him for it, but it's a legacy that we, as people in Trinidad, must respect and continue to build on.
And I take it that you're all proud of it too. And do you have to struggle to uphold it? You know, is that issue of privatization and is that creeping in, or is that something that you have to struggle with against the elites in your country?
Well, we have had and have politicians that come across as being sensitive to the plight of the rich. That to me is abhorrent. However, I believe that if they do what they have to do, but we do what we must do, then we can cushion the impact of political neglect, rejection, abandonment, political policies of helping the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. All we have to do is unite. So, me, for example, I don't believe in the system. I don't believe that there's justice in that system for us, but I believe that if we unite on the grassroots level, organize, pool our resources, come together, open skills banks and think tanks, then no matter what political decisions are made, we can find that strength within and among ourselves. And so the solution to our problems is in our own hands, regardless of what they do politically.
Well, that's a good segue into the project that you are the founder of and work.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, the Black Agenda Project. So tell us about that and what that's all about.
Right. So the Black Agenda Project is an organization that we established in Trinidad. First of all, the title was inspired by a speech that was done by the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan on July the 17th, 1988. Minister Farrakhan did a speech entitled The Black Agenda. And in it, he itemized an agenda of objectives that we as a community must achieve alongside the pursuit of reparations, centered around the concepts of freedom, justice, and equality. For the 10th anniversary of the Million Man March, which was October 15th, 2005, Minister Farrakhan established something called the Millions More movement. So in 1995, we had the Million Man March. In 2000, we had the Million Family March. Then in 2005, we had the Millions More movement, starting with the individual, then the family, then the wider community. And in this Millions More movement, an organizational structure was established that featured 9 ministries or 9 committees. When we launched the Black Agenda Project organization in 2012, we patterned it after those 9 ministries. So we have the 9 ministries are health, agriculture, education, security, arts and culture, business, justice, information, and science and technology. So the Black Agenda Project organization in Trinidad has these 9 simultaneous committees where we have different roles and responsibilities, different programs and projects through the 9 simultaneous committees in service to our community. But we had acquired land from the state, 3/4 of an acre in 2015. And we, with our own hands, with no government support or no major business or corporate support, we constructed a 6,000 square foot building, which we named in honor of Kwame Ture, the Kwame Ture Education Center. And currently, as we speak, we have free lessons for young students in maths, English, literature, business, accounts, social studies, human and social biology. We have public speaking workshops, which are about to resume. We have had, over the last 3 years, 11 African expos, the 12th one coming up in May. We've had weddings, funerals, birthrights, Eid celebrations. I lecture at the center every Sunday on behalf of the Nation of Islam. We have martial arts classes. We have the Friday Juma, counseling, different workshops. We had a African Women's Association award ceremony just about 2 weeks ago. We have art exhibitions. I mean, so much. It is the home of Black people in Trinidad and Tobago, by extension, the Eastern Caribbean. And when we say home, we say it's not the home that you come to go to sleep, but it's the home that you come to wake up and then go back out into the society and share the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. So our work is continuous, our work is consistent. Sometimes we have 2 activities taking place in the building at the same time. We just started an auto mechanics course. We're about to start a robotics course. We have a girls academy running. On June 16th, inshallah, we'll be launching our boys academy. And we've also had the African Unity Conferences, which is our main annual event, which we didn't have in 2020 nor 2021, but God willing, we'll have it again this year on May 28th. So there's so much happening, and it's always happening.
Well, as I said before we started the show, I really am looking forward to making plans to come and visit Trinidad, Tobago, and I'm really hoping that going forward, well, let me say, for almost a decade, I was very involved in an organization called Cobra here in the States, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. I haven't been as involved in the organization, although I'm quite committed to the idea, the concept, and actually, wanting to see that happen. And I hope going forward, there's more discussion, meeting, and sharing of ideas in terms of what CARICOM is doing and what and the reparations movement here in the States are doing, because I think we could learn from both. Any final words you might want to share in terms of the struggle for reparations or anything else in terms of the unity of our people and the struggle?
Yeah, well, what is on my mind right now, honestly, is that we need to be prepared. So we should have learned quite a few lessons from the pandemic. And now everything is opening back up. I hope we learn that we, as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had said, must have a survival kit in our homes. We have to be networked and organized with each other in such a way that we create minor internal economies within different segments of our community, which become part of a major Black economy, that we can provide each of our needs. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad established something called the economic blueprint. Think of a table with 18 squares, 6 rows and 3 columns. The 6 rows are food, clothing, shelter, education, transport, and health. And the 3 columns are level 1, level 2, and level 3, or primary, secondary, and tertiary. So we basically have 18 requirements to be a fully functional community. And it starts with growing our own food, then opening supermarkets, restaurants, and bakeries, wholesaling and retailing. Same thing with housing, shelter. We must have land. We must have farmland, but we must also get bricks and clay, cement, glass, sand, and construct our own homes, then we can build, we can sell, we can rent, but we're no longer slaves once we own our own. Our clothing. I mean, we wear the finest clothes, but we own the least clothing stores. We buy the most food, but we own the least supermarkets. We eat out the most, but own the least restaurants. It's just an awful economic paradox that we find ourselves in. And in addition to this, we live in food deserts. A food desert is a geographical space that is densely populated with large numbers of people, but there is no fresh food, fruits or vegetables available in adequate supply within their proximity. But we have the fast food restaurants that we can literally walk to sometimes.
I lost you. We lost your connection for a second.
My deepest apologies there. So we have to be organized in such a way that regardless of what happens in the future, that we're ready this time to be able to withstand the impact of any kind of pandemic or new lockdown restrictions. A lot of people lost a lot of money, a lot of people lost jobs, etc. But we must be structured as a community in such a way to be able to withstand that.
Brother David, thank you so much. You have been
Thank
a real wealth of information. I think I'm losing you again. I'm not sure what's happening with this connection. Oh, there you are again.
No, I'm right here. Yeah, I'm right here.
Again, I have to thank you so much. And for those of you who are watching this, please check out Dr. David Muhammad. He's on a number of platforms. You can find him on Facebook, YouTube, and he speaks for himself. I mean, the information and the brilliance is there. It comes right through. And like I said, if I have my way, I'm going to get down to Trinidad and
oh yes, sir.
Get some of that sun. But actually, also I want to learn from the people down there. And like I said, I think they have so much to offer. But again, thanks so much, and we'll be speaking soon. Check out Dr. David Muhammad, and really appreciate you, my brother.
Yeah, thank you. And you can find me on the website www.blackagendaproject.com. And that handle can be used.
All right.
And that handle, Black Agenda Project, it can be used for Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, any of the major platforms. Just do a search for Black Agenda Project, YouTube, and you'll find me there.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to stop the show right now. You stayed put, though, Dr. Muhammad. I just want to say a couple of words after the recording.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.